Hey, I'm Paeter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to Essential Issues Weekly, where I talk about DC Comics 1 week after their release on the Ultra tier of the DC Universe Infinite subscription service. In each installment, I pick an assortment of comics to talk about as a DC fan and also explore what, if anything, they have to say about the essential issues of real life. Now, warning, full spoilers for everything I talk about, so be aware this is your first and only warning that many spoilers lie ahead, I'll say. Okay, we're taking a look now at comics originally released to the Ultra tier on October 24th, 2023, and from that group, first I have chosen The Penguin #2, published on September 26th, 2023 originally, and for some reason, the name Tom King stood out to me, and I was like, oh, I think I've been finding that I enjoy his writing, but I didn't read the first issue, so let me go back and read that. There was actually a Zero issue written by somebody else, but I read both of those to kind of get a running start. I'm so glad that I did. This looks like after the kind of faked death of the Penguin, he is off and trying to kind of rebuild himself, intending to come back to Gotham and reclaim his empire, which was kind of stolen from him by his surviving illegitimate children. And this is just kind of like a rebuilding, it looks like, of the Penguin from the ground up. And I love what they're doing, establishing him as someone that many people at a glance do not take seriously, and I think that also reflects audiences, and me in particular. It reminds me a bit of what Jeff Johns was doing with Aquaman back in the day, where he took the audience, the general public perception of Aquaman as being kind of a silly, talks-to-fish guy, and made that something that was true of the average person in the DC universe as well. Not the hero community, but average Joe Schmo on the street. And I feel like they're doing something similar here with the Penguin, acknowledging that at a glance, many people just think of him as silly and harmless and stuff, but they are really establishing that he is this kind of a tactical genius or a manipulator, a way that he can seem to be like he's being ground underneath your heel when actually he is positioning you and others exactly where he wants them to ultimately get a checkmate in the end. And so I love this approach to rebuilding the Penguin, and I also love how in the book you're seeing a lot of dialogue or narration boxes of characters' internal monologues other than Oswald Cobblepot, other than the Penguin. And so it's very character driven, the writing, because it's taking us into the minds of the characters that he's interacting with, but never into his mind. And so I love it because it gives a sense of emotion and investment in each of the scenes because you're very personally connected to one of the two characters that are in that scene. But it also makes Cobblepot a mystery to us so that we don't know what he's up to until he actually enacts his plan. And so it's just a really interesting take on. I wouldn't have thought that I would like it. I would normally say, no, put me in the mind of the protagonist. But I love this choice, and I love so far what they are doing with the Penguin. Moving on then to Batman / Catwoman : Gotham War : the Red Hood. Anyway, it's part of the Gotham War crossover going on, which, despite involving various creative teams, I am enjoying following. And so this Red Hood special, again, like some of the other parts of this crossover, has not been super riveting, but the overarching kind of concept and story of splitting the vigilante / hero community of Gotham into two camps, one that are siding with Catwoman, one that are siding with Batman, I am finding interesting, and there's some moral complexity there, and some gray areas, and some nuance, and of course, with a character like Jason Todd's Red Hood, you got a premise, a central character that is ripe for that kind of morally complex storytelling. This issue wasn't super interesting to me, as I said, but there's one moment that really stood out. As Jason Todd is training these kind of thugs to a different way of doing things under, Catwoman's leadership, he's giving them some combat training, and one of these henchmen, former henchmen of another supervillain or whatever, says, to Jason, so what do you think? We ready to go toe to toe with Batman, you know? And he realizes, oh, wait a minute, you're actually asking me that seriously? And so then he like gets into this stance, this kind of this crouching stance, and says, all right, listen, you want to know what to do if you run into Batman? You get down real low like this, smaller target, control your center of gravity. You spread your legs for stability, and then you put your head between them and kiss your butt goodbye because you're already done. And I just, oh man, for probably a good like 30 seconds, I just read that over and over again. I can't remember the last time a comic made me laugh out loud. Like this moment did. So I guess that was probably the most striking, memorable moment. Although I'm going to continue, I think, following these crossover books as long as they, you know, continue to support and flesh out in new ways this pretty interesting premise of the Gotham War crossover. Next up, we have The Flash. All of these actually this week were originally published on September 26, 2023. And I've been surprised. I knew there was that Wally West was going to be in a Flash book, but I thought it was like maybe called Speed Force or something else, which that is a series that's still coming. But I assumed that would be Wally's book, and the main Flash book would be given back to Barry. But that does not look like it's the case at all, and that is very surprising to me, which just makes me wonder if the readership generally of comics is more my age of readers, because for people that are my age that are Flash fans and have been for a while, really it's more likely that Wally West is going to be the Flash that they love. And so I just love the respect and the focus that Wally West is given, not just in The Flash, but there's even a moment in Action Comics that came out this week where Lois says to, I'm just mentioning this now while I'm thinking of it in case I forget when I get there, but Lois says to Clark, like, Clark, I need you here quick. Not Wally quick, but like Barry quick. And I'm like, dang, he's getting such respect because Wally West is the fastest man alive. In fact, when we get into The Flash #1 and introduce him on his first page, he says, where is it? Oh yeah, my name's Wally West. I'm the fastest man who ever lived. And so they are really doubling down on just the respect for Wally as the fastest of the Flashes that's ever been. And I really love that, because it was Wally's run, especially when Mark Waid kind of introduced the Speed Force, that really elevated what the Flash as a concept could be in the DC Universe, what his power set could be capable of. That was all during Wally's tenure. And so to see them kind of, I think, acknowledging that in some way and coming back to that is wonderful. And I also think that Wally being a sidekick that grew into the role of hero to kind of like replace his fallen mentor is such a unique and special thing in the DC universe. And so, and it's like, it's so comic booky, like just the concept of a sidekick, you know, is such a comic booky thing. For that to be such a major part of a character's backstory and their origin and stuff is really, I think, unique and special. Another thing that's unique and special about Wally West is that he's a family man, which they seem to be continuing on with. Jeremy Adams' run right before this on The Flash really played up the kind of family vibe, the family premise for Wally West. I was concerned that would be discarded. I don't think it's going to be the case, but we are getting a little bit of a foreshadow here as he's interacting with Gorilla Grodd, which, by the way, I'm just tolerating. I do not like talking animals. I find them silly and for children, and no matter what they do to kind of grow them up and try to make them scary, they're still just silly-looking Disney characters to me, for the most part. Anyway, but Grodd says to Wally, my condolences, Flash, I have heard the news. And there's some time travel, timey stuff going on here, so maybe he's from the future, or it's not really clear what's going on, but he says, my condolences, Flash, I have heard the news. Breaking up is the purest pain of all. And Wally's like, what? What's that supposed to mean? And then he disappears into his, temporal portal or whatever the crap it is, and Wally's left to wonder what is going on. Now, I really hope that that's not the case, that the breakup being referred to there is between him him and his wife, the romance between Wally and Linda Park, culminating in not only marriage, but in also having kids, and then more recently a newborn, is a pretty special thing as well in the DC universe. And I think this writer maybe recognizes that, which is why I have hope that the family backdrop for Wally is not going to be discarded. The reason I think that this writer has an understanding of that is that we have a lot of kind of internal monologuing in Linda's scene shared with Wally from her perspective. And she is finding, that she was once part of all the action that was going on as she was pregnant, and the baby that's now been born was kind of giving her his superpowers, while he was growing inside of her. But now that the baby's out, she doesn't have those powers anymore. And yet her husband, her 2 older kids, and presumably as he grows up, her new son, all are going to have powers. And so she is just feeling like the world is racing around her and she's not able to keep up with it. And she's kind of missing out on the general flow of life that everyone else is experiencing. And the way they represent this is very, I think, fitting. They have a big shot with her sitting on the couch, and she's breastfeeding their newborn while there is this spinning circle of crackling Speed Force energy around her, representing Wally and maybe the kids, all kind of running around her doing their things. And she says, the people she loves, she's talking about herself in the third person, the people she loves will live 1,000 moments in every one of her dull, slow seconds. And so she's feeling, I think, kind of left behind. And I think this probably lines up with what a lot of mothers feel when they, especially in those early stages of their children's lives, are just tied down at home and they can't be part of their social circles. They just, their life is just all anchored to the home and to that baby for at least a significant period of time, and some mothers handle that differently and, will enter into the workforce, not long after that. And some of them for years, are content to be at home. But maybe at the same time, to varying degrees with each mother, they have that feeling of, I'm missing out. I'm here at home. Whether that's really ultimately where they want to be or not, I think it's probably a very common thing for mothers to feel like they're kind of missing out on things. And so I just love that the writer seems to have a recognition of this issue that is very specific to motherhood. And so that makes me hopeful that, like, okay, we've got a writer here that is going to see the potential for storytelling that is uniquely available when you have a character with a traditional family as part of their backdrop, and a great focus on Linda. Not to include her as being merely part of the backdrop, but I love the idea that maybe we'll see a great focus on Linda and stories from her perspective. So I'm very interested in the starting point of this new Flash series. It's interesting that the art does seem to have more ink to it. There are more shadows. There's more darkness. And I wonder if that's what was being talked about when Jeremy Adams, in an interview, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, said that, like, the next writer and the next direction they're taking is going to be darker. And I'm not necessarily getting a real sense of that now. I didn't feel like, oh, this is this harrowing, dark story that they're telling with The Flash. But at least the visual tone has a darker, a little bit more shadowy look to it. Not to the point where it feels like, oh, this isn't right for The Flash, but it's definitely different from what's come before. So, and also the enemy, I believe it's called the Unraveled, has this kind of weird vibe where they are literally unraveling people biologically and just leaving them a goopy, mess or something. It's a really weird, kind of creepy concept, which is a bit unusual as a Flash antagonist. So I'm very curious at this point what the new direction is going to be for this book, what it's going to generally feel like once we get a little deeper into it. But I am at least hopeful that it's something that the net result will be something that I enjoy. Next up, Green Arrow number 4, still Oliver Queen kind of stuck in the future and learning that his family is being kept apart. Apparently, we discover because of a deal that he made with Parallax, a time-traveling Parallax, the villain that Hal Jordan used to be, and there's a whole story behind all that. But like Parallax granted him some temporal power or something like that in order to keep his family apart, because apparently if Oliver Queen's family remains reunited, it's just going to mean a horrible fate for the world. And so we get a little bit more of a glimpse of that as Parallax takes him almost, it's a wonderful lifestyle through time to see what happens, the destruction that happens if his family is not kept apart. And again, I kind of wonder if the comic books are being written largely for those of us readers that were really into comics in the 90s and like the early to mid 2000s, because they're leaning into this whole Parallax thing. But they do some interesting things with it, because Ollie, when he's kind of having a confrontation with Parallax, says, "You're not the real Hal Jordan. You're just some weird alien parasite. You're a big old fake," you know, which that was kind of a retcon thing that Jeff Johns introduced later in order to, you know, because how do you quote unquote redeem Hal Jordan? Well, DC is not willing to bring Jesus into the equation, you know, and so they have to make it so that he actually never really did those bad things that Parallax did. It was actually this alien parasite that was living inside of him. So that's the retcon that Green Arrow's kind of referring to here. And Parallax then brings up some things that are kind of interesting questions to think about. He says, okay, well, did the fake Hal Jordan saved the world when the sun went out? Because that's how that iteration of Hal Jordan died before he was eventually brought back to life, sacrificing himself to save the world. So Parallax says, did the fake save the world when the sun went out? Did the fake give you your life back? Because Green Lantern died at one point, and Hal Jordan, as Parallax, brought him back. He says, was that Hal or was that me? So they're doing some kind of interesting things. But then he says, were my acts of redemption not enough? And I think it's interesting that this is coming from the villain. I don't think this is an intentional commentary on the concept of redemption, but I do think it's interesting that the voice of the villain here thinks of redemption as something that can be self-earned through acts that we do. And what's always been interesting to me about that is if there is a higher moral standard that we ought to be, you know, living out, then we can't really make up for wrongs of the past with the right things we do today, because that moral standard says that the right things we do today, we should be doing anyway. We are already obligated to do those things. And so we can't really make up for the deeds of the past, you know, the misdeeds of the past. But anyway, yeah, I'm still in the place where this Green Arrow story, I'm not really interested in this kind of cosmic time traveling and sci-fi stuff as a Green Arrow book. I think, like Batman, I like Green Arrow to be pretty street level and pretty gritty. And so, but it also looks like there may be setting up a major status quo change. And so at this point, that's still what I'm mainly on board for. I do appreciate the treat as a Green Lantern fan of digging into his relationship with Hal Jordan and Parallax and stuff like that. But really, the moment-to-moment storytelling is not what I would really want to come to a Green Arrow book for. Then we've got Power Girl #1, which is interesting. I can tell they're trying to continue some of the things that they set up in the Power Girl and Omen backup story that was running through Action Comics, which I really disliked because they were running some kind of psychotherapy business for superheroes, and it was just too lighthearted and really I felt kind of silly, you know, for me to be interested in. But now they're still taking this friendship that was established between Power Girl and Omen, and they're just telling a different story. They're setting up Power Girl with a new secret identity. Dr. Paige Stetler is who she is now, and she's working with Steelworks, with, I don't know, that's John Henry Irons' company, so she's in the tech industry. And I'm kind of interested in seeing where they go with Power Girl, because like so many other characters that are in that Superman family, you kind of, I think at some point, have to figure out what's going to be different and interesting about this character that makes them more than just a female version of Superman. And that's even harder now because there's already a Supergirl, so how is she just not another Supergirl? Well, what they lean into in this story that I'm appreciating is the fact that she is from Earth 2, which is the Golden Age continuity of DC Comics. So she is actually the cousin of the original 1938 Golden Age Superman. And by the end of this story, it looks like they're going to be leaning into that because she needs to investigate the outbreak of a virus that has been analyzed and determined to be Kryptonian in origin, but specifically it seems to be from her Krypton, which that timeline has now been erased. It doesn't exist anymore, and so she's this stranded Earth 2 survivor in the mainstream DC universe. So I hope they will really kind of lean into those Earth 2 origins of Power Girl. Something as a side thing, this is just like a little preference of mine that I would love to see, especially if they're going to lean into her Earth 2 origins, is to get into, to like change up her costume just a little bit. They've got basically the costume that she has been known for wearing for a long time, where, except for instead of a red cape, she's wearing like a red jacket, and we saw this in the pages of Action Comics. And then on the shoulders of and back of this costume, she has the traditional Superman S insignia. But on her chest, she has kind of like an open spot, which basically just showcases her cleavage, and I think that's what that design was originally about. Jeff Johns, however, when he told a Power Girl story years ago, kind of retconned that into an interesting idea, where she was saying, you know, people ask, you know, people wonder why I have this, and, you know, it's not to show my cleavage, it's because I always felt like there was something missing that would go there, and I didn't know what fit there, you know. And at that time, she had amnesia about her Earth 2 origins. But when she got those memories restored to her, I don't remember them putting an S or some kind of other symbol on her chest. So she's still, but that was a big moment, like, oh, I have belonging. Earth 2 Superman and Earth 2 Lois. These are like the closest thing to my family. And then we had the Identity Crisis, or the, Infinite Crisis storyline. But even after that, it didn't seem, I don't remember her getting a symbol on her chest. So what am I getting back to? All of this, if we're trying to kind of establish her as kind of unique and different, but still part of that Superman family, I would love for them to take the really old school, golden age, very first iteration, or very early iteration of the Superman insignia, and have that be on her chest and like on her arms if she wants or something. So that would be a cool way to, at a striking visual level, to really associate her with that timeline, with that legacy. Maybe that's something I can hope that they will do at the end of this story arc, which certainly seems positioned to kind of represent who Power Girl is, to reestablish who she is, kind of from the ground up, as I think they're trying to do with a number of these books. You know, we're seeing that with Penguin, and then we're also seeing that in the next comic, and the last comic I'm going to talk about this time, and that's Action Comics 1057. First off, I love how this issue starts. You just see 2 feet hanging over empty space, and realize that Superman is sitting next to a construction worker on high steel, and they're just talking about, like, you know, how's your day been and stuff like that, and sharing a little bit of lunch together. It's this really kind of sweet, well, first it really just kind of establishes Superman as someone who really cares about people. And then you eventually, you know, this guy is sharing about this frustration he's having with his son stealing money from, you know, his wife's purse, and he feels like, I was in prison for years, and I or however long, and he's gonna laugh at me if I try to give him a lecture. And Superman's like, no, you are exactly the guy. You're exactly, because he at first says he needs a dad like you for this kind of thing, and Superman cuts him off, says, hey, he has the perfect dad for this, because you understand right and wrong as more than just abstracts. You made the same kinds of mistakes he's making, paid for them, and had the guts to turn it all around. You're exactly the dad Steven needs. Just tell him the truth. And I love that moment of caring for this guy. I love the idea of transparency and humility being propped up as something that is important for dads to have in disciplining their kids and talking to their kids. And so this is just a great moment where Superman is being the ideal that I would really want him to be. There's so many times when other agendas and stuff get in the way of Superman being written that way. But I think this is a great moment where Superman is kind of representing an ideal. And you know, not only that, but like my eyes almost started welling up at the end when he says, when this construction worker says, "Hey, you don't have to keep checking on me. You got a universe to take care of. You can't be wasting time on some ex-con you put away." And I was like, oh my gosh, Superman was even responsible for this guy being caught and going to prison. And then what's the next thing Superman says? "I'm not checking on you, Glenn. I just like eating lunch with friends, that's all." And I'm like, oh my gosh, what a beautiful thing. What a beautiful thing, you know? So just a great, simple, character-driven, quiet scene that I love it. I love it. I don't have any more words to describe it. Next up, they're finishing up the flashback story about young John Kent and Lois and Clark when they were kind of not often hiding. This was after that, but they kind of went back and lived on the farm for a little while longer as they were raising him. And as I think I've said before, I really want these kinds of stories about young John Kent. The fact that they're being made says to me that there's at least a section of the audience that they think still wants young John Kent. And so I'll just say again, I would really love it if DC found a way. It's going to be so hard for the fans of the older John Kent, especially since he's come out as bisexual. That just adds all kinds of politics to the situation and all kinds of like overly simplistic, I think, reactions that could come from them de-aging him because they've, you know, established him that way now. But I still think there's so much value in him being a boy, and I think some people at DC at least think that there's value in that too, because they're telling this ongoing flashback story arc. So, but this does wrap it up. That said, I'm fine with this story in particular being wrapped up because it's a lot of adventures of Superboy kind of stuff, and I really think that leaning into the family aspects of this young John and his parents is the best use. That's how you really leverage that kind of thing. And there is a sweet moment that kind of plays that up a little bit as they're walking adventure over back into the farm, you know, to make pancakes, you know. Young John says, "Hey, that black suit has me," because Clark was wearing the black suit at this time. "That black suit has me wondering about something, Dad. Is it true that after you came back from the dead, you had a mullet?" And Lois says, shamefully, "Yes." And Clark says, "No." "Just longer hair that grew during the recovery process." Lois says, "Mullet." He says, "Long hair." She says, "Mullet, long hair. And who told you about that, John?" He says, "Damien." Clark says, "Figures." So is this great moment, again, I think playing to fans that were reading, like me, that were reading comics in the 90s and 2000s, but also this sweet little moment of family ribbing going on. That's how you really leverage John Kent at this age and in this situation with his parents. Next is a backup story with Connor Kent, whose book, I believe, ended recently. They tried to do a Superboy Man of Tomorrow book with him, and I think it only went 6 issues and then was done. And it looks like they're trying to take another crack at reestablishing Connor Kent and interest in him. And he's telling his girlfriend, McGann, who's Ms. Martian, about kind of the identity crisis he's feeling right now, and she goes into his mind at his invitation to kind of like process this stuff. And so we see a splash page of all the different costumes and iterations that Superboy has had, and as just a reminder that, like, yeah, they've really tried to reinterpret him over and over again. What he's feeling like right now is, well, I'll just read it. He says, "I don't even know who I am. I only exist because someone wanted to back up Superman. And now I'm not even that because he has an adult son all of a sudden." And I'm like, all of a sudden, man, if that doesn't just speak to how I feel about that crappy situation. But yes, he's got an adult son. If they would just DH John Kent. But it looks like they're trying to find a solution to make Connor Kent his own character without doing that. So anyway, I'll get off of that. But he says, "I'm not even that because he has an adult son all of a sudden. I've got Superman's DNA. I live in Superman's old house with Superman's parents. I go to Superman's old high school and sleep in Superman's old bed. I've got his symbol on my chest. And when I look in the mirror, the only face I see is his." And so this says to me, okay, they see a problem here with Connor, and they're positioning this book to one more time and hopefully definitively compared to past attempts, define who this character is, what makes him unique. And in the next panel, he says, am I supposed to be Superboy my whole life? Which makes me even wonder, okay, are we looking at a rebranding of his name as well? Which maybe would make some sense. I mean, especially since they're showing that he's got some scruff growing on his chin. But he's left in this place of real conflict. And the tease box at the very end of, let's see, yeah, it's the whole issue, says Superboy's adventures continue in the pages of Superman, which I think is good. Hopefully this will not be replaced with another kind of backup story. I would really like Action Comics to be a max of 2 different storylines, just so that we can invest a greater page count in stories and really avoid them feeling rushed like they, I think, have in the past. So hopefully that's an indication of that. I don't know. But anyway, Superboy's adventures continue in the pages of Superman and in the new Speed Force #1. And I'm thinking, what? Speed Force #1? Okay, so with this rebranding, you're not going to turn him into some kind of super speed character, are you? So I'm very curious what in the world he's going to be doing on a regular basis in a new Speed Force comic book. So I'm very curious. I can't say that I'm optimistic about what they're going to do with Connor Kent, but you can definitely color me curious. Anyway, yeah, I think those are all of my thoughts on comic books for now. As always, I'd love to get your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. Remember to check out then christiangeekcentral.com for tons more content. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. It is time again for Christian Geek Central's annual Game Save event, fundraising for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, which provides free treatment for children facing life or death circumstances and shares its cutting-edge, life-saving research with hospitals all over the world. And once again this year, I'm drawing attention to our team's fundraising by performing a 24-hour marathon of video gaming that I will live stream on youtube.com/ChristianGeekCentral beginning 6 a.m. Pacific Time on Saturday, November 4th. You can donate or get more info by clicking on my fundraising page in the links below, where you'll also find incentives and rewards for doing so. On top of that, I've set fundraising milestones that will unlock strange and unusual happenings as I reach them. Now, there are some stipulations and time limits on those rewards and milestones, so quickly follow the link below to my fundraising page for all the details. Believe it or not, this makes the 10th consecutive year of Christian Geek Central raising funds for kids in great need of medical care. I hope you'll be a part of helping me and the Christian Geek Central Game Save team do some good for some kids who really need it. And then please join me at youtube.com/ChristianGeekCentral for my 24-hour marathon starting at 6 a.m. Pacific on Saturday, November 4th. Hope to see you there.